Happy New Year and welcome to this fresh edition of Mani Ki Baat, Suneet Ke Saath. I am Mani, she is my wife Suneet, and today we have a quite exceptional guest with us, someone who has carefully studied the Chinese economy and has written an outstanding article in a newsletter called India Forum, in which he has described the rise of China from being a developing country, even if they didn't call themselves that, into a world power. Nainan, you say that the 21st century may belong to China, but certainly not to Asia or India. What I want to ask you as a first opening question is why has China fulfilled our common dream, but India lags far behind? You want to add to that before he speaks?
You know, my mother went to the International Trade Fair held in Beijing. When was it?
1956.
1956. And she came back shell-shocked because she said everybody's on cycles. You can't tell whether you're talking to a man or a woman. Their clothes are uniform. Short tunic and loose baggy pants or pajamas, same color, same haircut, all short haircut. So you know that was China then. Look at China now. But we were never like that. We were always diverse. We were always sort of an open society. Is that what has held us back and pushed them forward?
China is not really a country with whom anyone should compare because it really is unique, its performance. It is not that India has done badly. We've had our failures and we've had our disappointments, but India has done quite well, particularly after 1991 and in some ways in the early Nehru years as well. Given the starting point where India was, to be now the fifth largest economy, overtaking several others which are bigger than us, including Russia, Brazil, large countries, Canada, Italy, Spain, Britain and France. So we've done quite well. So our performance pales in comparison to China, but any country's performance will pale in comparison to China because China has been quite unique.
Can you summarize these achievements? What are China's economic achievements?
Well, what I've said in my article is essentially that in this last 25 years, China has gone through three phases. It began at the start of this millennium by being a manufacturer of low-cost mass employment items like garments, shoes, toys.
Your exact words were that in the first phase, China began by becoming, quote, an export-oriented hub for labor-intensive production that needed simple production technology. And the question I was going to ask you at that point was, were we different?
Yes, we were completely different.
In what sense?
Because number one, we were export pessimists. We didn't believe that we could succeed in exports.
That's true.
And we were advised by many economists that we should focus on the domestic market. Number one. Number two, we held ourselves back with a whole set of rules and policies and regulations that prevented large employment-intensive factories from being set up because you had hundreds of items reserved only for small-scale manufacture.
Was this only till 1991? Or it was true from 1991 to the time when the Chinese
even up to
economic started?
2010, you still had items reserved for small-scale sector. So it went in phases slowly, but we basically prevented large-scale employment-intensive factories from being set up, which was a second policy failure. And the third is that we made life difficult for business in general. with all the controls and license Raj. You couldn't get raw materials, you couldn't get imported machinery, you know. So it was a very controlled system. And we didn't therefore achieve what China did in its first round of achievements before the start of the century.
So you're talking of China in the 21st century.
That's my article, but
Yeah.
this is pre-21st century.
Okay, now it may have started just before. But to begin with, you mentioned Nehru, and that's why I want to bring this in. To begin with, you've written in your essay that the Chinese success is attributable to a strategic phased approach combined with state planning, industrial policy, subsidies, magnificent infrastructure, and market scale. Now, when I look at these 5 or 6 words as an unreconstructed Nehruvian socialist, I can't see anything different from the Nehruvian model, because the Nehruvian model was also a strategic phased approach. It was also based on state planning. It did involve a major industrial policy. It had built into it a lot of subsidies. Infrastructure was not on the scale, but it was certainly regarded as important. And for market scale, our population was just short of the Chinese population. So, as I said, your initial description of China in the earlier years is almost exactly a description that could just be changed by switching China to India. So that's why I call it Nehruvian. So why did we get left behind? Is it because we didn't move to the first phase of export-oriented, labor-intensive production? Or is it for the reason that it was misconceived?
We didn't do two things that I have assumed, which we failed on and China succeeded, which is universal education
Yes.
and healthcare. So
But
they
wait a
had
minute,
an
just a minute,
industrial
just-
workforce that was far more capable than ours.
There's just one thing I want to say here. It just came to me. I attended a lecture by Amartya Sen in 1990, in which he said that when it comes to university education, our university graduates are 6 times greater than China. But he added that when it comes to primary schooling, there are 6 times more students in primary school. So by the time we came to the 21st century, the primary school students had gone to university, and China had caught up and overtook us with regard to university graduates. So does the fault lie in the planned approach that Nehru adopted in 1950-51? Or does it lie in the fact that it went on for too long in the 1970s and into the 80s?
Yes, it is very true that we should have course corrected in the 70s and 80s, which we failed to do. I think we were probably too caught up in ideas that became ideology, as somebody said. And we were not result oriented in the way that China became by the mid 70s. After Mao, 76 and 78, when Deng Xiaoping took charge, what was his thing? That we will cross the river by feeling the stones.
Yeah.
Each step you check to see, is it working? Here, even if you report after report will say something is not working, but the necessary corrective action does not follow.
Yes, I certainly remember at the end of the 1970s, a book was written by L.K. Jha called Economic Strategy for the 80s. And it seems to have been written by L.K. Jha acting on behalf of Deng Xiaoping, because that laid out what was to be done. And it was the same L.K. Jha that Mrs. Gandhi picked up on in 1980 when she came back to power and made him the chairman of the Economic Strategy Committee.
Administrative Reforms Commission.
Yeah, the Economic Reforms Commission. So obviously there was an understanding that we had to change. So why did it not change, or did the change take place too slowly in the 1980s?
We changed far too slowly, far too hesitantly, and we still did not correct the failures on primary education and healthcare.
Yeah.
So you didn't have the first prerogative or first requirement, which was educated, healthy workforce, and you didn't have the large factories where they could work.
To
Yeah, sorry.
digress a little, um, we are not all economists, but the general feeling of those who defend the Indian style or the Nehruvian economy and so on is that China is not a diverse society. It doesn't have a multitude of languages, it doesn't have a multitude of religions and different social practices and customs. And secondly,
And nor a multitude of opinions.
okay, and also we never had the authoritarian system of government where, when they had the one child policy, we read reports, I don't know if they were biased, but they did have the one child policy, and they have changed it now, and they were even drowning babies where someone in a distant village who was not caught by the Red Guards had a second child, and they would drown, the nurse would drown the baby. That's what I read in the Reader's Digest. Did all this repression and the no freedom of movement, you couldn't leave your town or village or district to go to another place in search of a job. How much of a role did all this play in China's economic success?
One can go into 50 reasons why they succeeded and as many reasons why we have succeeded less. I once again say that any country that compares itself with China will come off second best. Every physicist should not compare himself with Einstein. China is unique and without precedent in human history in the way that they have done this in such a short period of time. From becoming the factory to the world to today now becoming the laboratory to the world. In my piece, I have talked about how Nature magazine looks at the research output in the leading universities, and 7 of the top 10 research universities are in China. In Nature magazine's ranking of these universities, their national R&D budget, when you correct for purchasing power parity, is close to the US national R&D budget, although its per capita income is of 1/6 or less of US per capita income. So this is an exceptional society. It is very result oriented. It has a political meritocracy. You can't, although it's a one-party state and a one-party system, the fact is that they pick the brightest students from the best universities and get them into the party, and then your rise up the party hierarchy depends on performance. At urban government level, at provincial government level, you have to deliver, and then you move up the hierarchy. So it's a totally different system.
Okay, I think we're jumping too far into the outcomes.
Okay.
When we were talking about the process. What happened was enormous domestic investment, mostly by the state and state-owned companies in the initial stages. I want to repeat that. Enormous domestic investment, mostly by the state and state-owned companies in the initial stages. But then that's what the Nehruvian model was. And what I want to understand is why, in these circumstances, when it seems that the philosophies, the economic philosophies of the two countries were comparable, if not the same, there's been this Chinese success. And compared to that success, our success looks as if we are lagging behind. How do you explain that?
Our state sector did not generate the surpluses that the Chinese state sector did.
Why is that?
Because we were not result oriented. You tolerated failures and non-performance all the time. Your public sector was sucking in resources and not spewing out surpluses or profits. So it's a very different experience, and they have an export-led system which generated the surpluses which then the state could invest. And we were trying to survive with deficits on our budgets. They were generating their resources to invest, and they invested well. We invested badly.
I see. Okay. Then I was going to ask you before you explained this as to was it because we failed to first establish, before undertaking this enormous domestic investment through the state and state owned entities, that the Chinese had established first an unparalleled domestic production base backed by the most modern physical infrastructure. You'll recognize these words.
Yes.
They're really yours.
Yes.
Yes, tell us more about this. The domestic production base and the outstanding physical infrastructure.
They invited the leading companies in the world to come and set up factories, car factories, all kinds of production.
And we
places.
didn't.
Nike to come and make shoes, etc., etc. And we kept out foreign companies. We restricted the role that foreign companies had. The nomenclature may have been similar, that they had industrial policy, we had industrial policy, they had the state sector, we had state sector. But the way in which these operated were completely different. And I think the fundamental difference that I would point to is that they were result oriented. And when the results were not coming, they changed policy. We were not result oriented.
Would you like to bring?
So, but to what extent is the political system that we adopted and which China adopted responsible for this difference in outcomes? Coming back to the repression phase and the uniformity of their culture and our diversity, what is that what held us back? That we couldn't do these reforms at that level?
Suneet, China internally is a bitterly competitive system. You have to compete to survive. We protected our producers, and you mollycoddled them. And once you got a license, you didn't have to be particularly efficient to be profitable. But over there, even now, for instance, they have 100 companies making electric vehicles. They have to compete and survive. Otherwise, you fail.
So if we did not have this...
So it may seem like state monopoly, one party state, but internally it is a very competitive system.
Economically or politically too?
In both. I mean, it is a meritocracy politically. That's why they get these leaders that they do. And economically, of course, it's bitterly competitive. They're competing, Huawei is competing with Xiaomi, BYD is competing with somebody else. They're all in a competitive market.
So this concept that democracy has slowed us down, this is wrong, is not true, whereas a more authoritarian system would have pushed us up easily.
Any system can be made to work well or work badly.
Yeah.
Democracies have worked very well. Authoritarian systems have worked very well.
And you've also
badly,
said that
authoritarian systems have worked badly.
the democracy in India has worked well. It's only that it hasn't worked as well as the Chinese.
Yes.
And that, I think, is because of what you say. Again, I quote you, that China adopted a managerial approach at the political level.
Yes.
And we did not.
Yes.
In fact, we adopted a political approach at the managerial level.
Correct.
So I'd like you to expand on that.
Well, it's in a way what I already said, that it operates as a meritocracy. And as the
China does.
China does. And our political system depends on people who can win a vote. That is not a requirement there. You are in control, so you can then focus as a manager on what needs to get done. You can set yourself a goal saying in 10 years we will develop our solar energy sector, and then you can focus on how that is to be done. Here a government will change every 5 years or fall in 2 years. But the managerial approach is very, very strong. And I think that is what That kind of long-term planning is more complicated here than it is over there.
In your brilliant article, you have said that in the current phase, China is marked by, quote, a breakthroughs in technologies of the future. That's the key characteristic of the current phase. Breakthroughs in technologies of the future. Where does India stand in regard to technologies of the future?
We don't stand very well. They have become the world leaders in solar power, all the clean energy sectors, solar, wind, and nuclear. They've become the leaders in all of them, and in fact, they dominate those sectors. Half the nuclear power stations in the world are being set up in China. 90% of the solar installations are done by China. More than 50% of the wind energy. So they have dominated clean energy. Then they've dominated electric vehicles and batteries, and they've put enormous R&D effort, and they moved early in both these sectors. Today, they are dominating in robotics. Half the world's robots are being installed in China, and they are 6 times the number 2 country, which is Japan. So robotics are dominating. Drones, they've gone ahead of everybody else. 5G telecommunications, they have the best telecom system in the world. So, and then they're moving even further into artificial intelligence and into 3 nanometer chips and 5 nanometer chips, and they are fighting and they're getting around the technology controls and the import controls or export controls that the European and American economies are imposing on them. And they have the companies which have the research budgets, $25 billion, a single company research budget. I mean, this is at another level of activity which most of us in India will not be able to comprehend.
Will this economic power and this huge head start that China has over us for whatever reason, how will it impact Indo-Chinese relations when there is a section of public opinion which thinks of China as enemies, whereas we, as Mani said, grew up in the era of Hindi China Bhai Bhai and Panchsheel, those 5 principles and so on, which nobody talks about. And when we as tourists visited Beijing, that was my first visit. When was it?
I don't know.
About 20 years ago. I wore a sari, as I always do, every day, no matter where we were, at the Great Wall of China or at the huge, beautiful palace grounds and so on. And the Chinese would flock around me, the other tourists, they were all Chinese tourists, and take pictures, and the women would hug me. And when I related this to our daughters when we came back to Delhi, they were amazed. They said, weren't you threatened because you went openly dressed as an Indian? I said, no, I was loved. So is there going to be love or bye-bye, or will this make China much more belligerent, more aggressive on our borders?
States are different from people. People can be friendly, states can be hostile. I've been to China several times, and I was there 3 months ago. And all the Chinese are very friendly. They were waving at you, they want to take pictures with you. There is no street level hostility, and that is true, with some of our neighbors as well. But as a state, India and China are fundamentally competitive and adversarial. And it's increasingly become an unequal relationship because of how far they've progressed. Industry, technology, services, military. China now produces 4 to 5 times as many submarines in a year as the United States. And we will do 1 submarine every 2 or 3 years. They'll do 5 or 6 in a year. This is, I think it's reached a point where we should stop comparing ourselves with China. These are not. We should stop comparing ourselves with China.
Yes, quite.
These are no longer comparable. They're so far ahead that we should not be looking at this and saying, we are equal to them or we are trying to be like them.
So there'll be no goodwill at the government level. That's what you're saying.
They obviously want to constrain you. You're a large country. You're a populous country. You're a country with great potential. Why would they want a competitor in their neighborhood? So they will obviously try and constrain you. There are more Chinese naval ships in the Indian Ocean than the Indian Navy has, you know.
Should we be jealous of the Chinese, frightened of their domination, or just congratulate them on having got as far as they have and see whether there are areas of cooperation, beginning with settling the border? I mean, they have borders with 14 countries. They've settled it by give and take with 12 of them. The only two countries left out are Bhutan and India.
Yes.
Bhutan is desperate to be given permission by India to come to a settlement with the Chinese. That leaves us, India, as the only country that is unable to find a via media, and that too where Nehru said, not a blade of grass grows.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the guy who got the laugh was my MP from Dehradun, Mahavir Tyagi, who was completely bald. So he stood up and patted his head and says, nothing grows here either, but does that mean it's not needed? So, like you're laughing now, everyone laughed and Nehru's point was lost. So, today, when the Chinese are where they are, we are where we are. And I'm so glad that you put it in these terms, that they've gone ahead, but it's not that we haven't gone ahead. We too have gone ahead. But while they have overtaken the rest of the world, we are still catching up with them. So in this phase, when both of us are growing, both of us are becoming dominant economies, important economies, should we not be cooperating with them? Or should we continue to be jealous and frightened and say, no, they and we can't live together in the same space?
We have, our bilateral relationships have, as you pointed out, been bedeviled by this border dispute. And I think it is obvious that we made mistakes in the way we negotiated with the Chinese. At least 2 points in the past, they were willing to do a deal which made sense in terms of give and take. And we didn't respond.
In
right away.
1960, when
And in,
you and I came
and
to-
in 1980, when
That's
Deng
right.
Xiaoping settled borders with so many other countries around them, we didn't respond to the overtures that were made. So, so we made our mistakes. Today, they don't see why they should do a deal because they have the drop on you. So they can keep you on the defensive and not let you off the hook, so to speak. So that's one.
Our negotiators, as far as I can see, for the last 60 years, for the last 60 years, have been going into the negotiation as if they were lawyers defending a case,
Yes.
rather than as negotiators attempting to come to a solution. So, should we be lawyers or should we be diplomats? That, I think, is the fundamental question.
You know, Mani, this is our negotiating position in all spheres. In trade negotiations, everything else, you want to get, but you don't want to give. And you keep becoming the outlier in any multilateral negotiating forum because of this particular attitude. And we took the same attitude with the Chinese. I think a settlement was easily possible in the late 1950s. And I think a settlement is probably possible even in the early 1980s. Today, why should they settle? What do they have to gain? They've got you on the hop.
Nevertheless, I get the impression that I don't think, I can see that we are not as much of a rival of theirs as we were perhaps 60, 70 years ago.
Yes.
But nevertheless, they don't gain anything from keeping us on the hop, as you put it. So I think if we were to change our negotiating strategy from that of defending our position to attempting to see where it is that we could come together, we might succeed. Anyway, I also sometimes think that if you go back into the past, they got Confucius in the 6th century BC when we got the Buddha.
We got the Buddha.
So I'm not sure that their getting Confucius and our getting the Buddha had something to do with their being ahead of us today and our not being able to catch up. Because it's not a communist system. It's a Confucius communist system,
Yes.
which has been very adaptable as far as economic policy is concerned.
And in terms of economic policy, we have been so defensive. We try and keep out their products. We try and keep out their companies. They are the cheapest producers of so many products, but you don't want to buy from them. They are the most efficient company, but you don't want to allow them into your system. We are now defensive and frightened. There is a move now to say, this has gone too far. We need to open up and ease up a little bit and take advantage of what they can do for you.
Absolutely. But in view of what Suneet said to you about the oppression and the tyranny of the communist political system, and what we enjoy, pretend to enjoy in India, in an open democracy, freedom of thinking, freedom of the press, fundamental rights, and so forth. My last question to you is, would you have preferred to be born in China?
No.
Why?
Well, I'm speaking from my position,
Yes.
where I have benefited from all the advantages of the Indian system,
Yes.
and not suffered from its many disadvantages.
True.
But if you ask somebody in a different economic situation, his or her answer may be quite different. I enjoy freedom. I'm a journalist. I enjoy freedom of expression. I want to say what I want to say. I want to vote for whom I want to vote for. These are important to me. But if you're not getting enough bread to eat, then his view will be different.
I don't know whether you're right. Because if you look at Bastar, or that whole area, the central belt of India, where Naxalism flourished to the point that Manmohan Singh described it as the single biggest internal security challenge to India.
Yes.
And we see that they are now surrendering in large numbers. Even the poorest of the poor Indians, who were the tribals of Central Asia, Central India, they seem to have preferred our system to continuing to be. They were not enamored of the Chinese model as was being promoted to them by the so-called Maoists of the Nakshal movement.
I don't think the Maoists offered any real alternative to the tribals. And the fact that the Maoists have now been defeated, which is the wonderful thing as far as I'm concerned, does not mean that our system is going to treat the tribals any better.
No, but do they know it? Because don't forget, it's not just now that
I
this
don't
tribal.
know how much volition and agency they actually have,
Okay.
or where they're caught up in circumstances and forces that they're not in control of.
Nevertheless,
But Mani, before we end,
Yeah.
would you like to have been born in China instead of India in 1941?
no, I would much rather have been born in India, not only because of the point that Nainan made. In fact, I have had an even more privileged life as an Indian than you did, Nainan. But I think even if I were a tribal, I would prefer the possibility of being here. There was a time when Pakistan was economically performing better than India.
Yes.
And this story that I'm about to tell comes from there, where it said that, I was told this in Pakistan, that there were two dogs, an Indian dog and a Pakistani dog, crossing each other at the Wagah-Atari border. And the Indian dog looked at the Pakistani dog and said, but your kebabs are so much better than ours. Why are you crossing to India? And the Pakistani dog said, क्योंकि कभी कभी भौंकने का दिल लगता है सो हम यहाँ भौंक सकते हैं और चीन में नहीं भौंक सकते हैं and that is fundamentally the reason why I do not envy the Chinese. I admire them, but I'm glad I'm not a Chinese.
But
I'm
let
delighted
me
that I'm
say,
Indian.
Mani, that you are sitting in a city where the air quality index is at 400.
Yeah.
Beijing was at one time the most polluted
Worse.
city in the world, but they've cleaned up. Now it has blue skies. They find solutions to their problems. We only talk about them.
Well, I have great hope in our younger generation because they have so much opportunity to specialize in different areas, to choose their field of work. And I do think
The Chinese
idealism is not
youngsters,
there.
the Chinese youngsters have infinitely more opportunities to be at the frontiers of production technologies, research, the quality of their education. Suneet, we should not delude ourselves.
But not journalism.
But not journalism.
Nainan could never have existed in China.
And we would never be Mr. and Mrs. Iyer because you would not have been allowed to leave Tanjore district. You would have been confined there, and I would have been confined to Amritsar. And what we would not have had these lovely.
Well, on that note, I think we can end this program by saying the Chinese have done much better than us when it comes to economics, but perhaps we've done better than them with regard to human rights. Nevertheless, there is a great deal we need to do on human rights, and there's even more that we need to do with regard to economics. So thank you very much. Namaskar. Jai Hind.